Yeah, go please.
Good evening, Archer families, Archer students. Thank you so much for being with me this evening and providing me with the time and opportunity to hopefully ensure that you feel really confident and ready for the next steps in terms of our return to school, something that we have all long been looking forward to. Now, I am going to take you through a series of information this evening because there are some logistical challenges ahead of us. And I'm going to go through that information quite carefully to ensure that you feel as best supported as possible and that you're able then to make some good decisions for your child, yourself and your wider family. Now, I'm delighted this evening to be joined by Miss Marnie, Mr. Latter, Mr. Gillow, Mr. Mustafa, Miss Alcock and Miss Martin. All of those colleagues are here this evening to support this process and also to perhaps answer some of your questions later on once I've given the information. If you do have questions this evening, please may I ask you to put them into the Q&A function. Mr. Gillow is managing the Q&A function, and once I've given the presentation, he will then forward those questions either to myself or to different colleagues who are joining me this evening so that you are able to get the answers to those questions. Please know that there is never a silly question. But your question may help somebody else get an answer to something that they were looking for, but also may at school level make me think of something that we've forgotten. And at this stage, that is highly valued by myself. So I'm going to hand over to my slides and then I'm going to take you through this journey step by step. And I hope it's something that you will find helpful and supportive. So we now find ourselves, Archer community, at the point where we are preparing to transition from our virtual world to our physical world and look at how we do reopen our school from next Monday. We know that since the 4th of January, we've been very much operating as a virtual school. Some children, of course, have been in school. That might well be your child, but the majority have been online learning at home with their teachers teaching virtually. But over the next week, we will be able to bring back the right-hand picture, the picture of children in school uniforms, in school, learning face-to-face with their teachers. And however good our online school has been, we know that it is no substitute for the benefits and opportunities that in-school provides. But this period of transition, I know, does feel exciting on some levels, but daunting on others. And at this stage, both you and your child may be at very different stages on that value continuum, somewhere between excited and somewhere between daunted. Please know that all of those feelings and emotions at this time are valid. And that some days are going to be different to others. Some days we may feel really secure and upbeat, and others we may feel a little bit more anxious and overwhelmed. All of that is to be expected as we go through this quite significant period of change. And I wonder whether any of these questions have triggered in your minds over the last couple of weeks. And I hope that I'm going to be able to answer them for you this evening. So what will it be like? How quickly can we get back to normal? We're all quite keen on that one, aren't we? It feels a bit complicated. What does lateral flow testing involve? Why are we doing lateral flow testing? What are the risks to school? Is school safe? Has my child fallen behind? How will I or you know? How will you manage their transition back to school? How do I support my child, and how will you support my child if they're anxious? All of those are things that I hope that I will cover this evening. And of course, you may have wider questions that you may wish to ask once we've gone through the presentation. But please know that all of those things are really valid when we are going through such a period of change. We have had to live with this for a really long time. It's almost a year since we first went into lockdown, and life has been very uncertain with lots of chopping and changing. We've all found that hard. Just the amount of restrictions and the amount of changing in those restrictions. But we are beginning now to enter a period of perhaps more certainty. That's of course been brought about by the reduction in infections and by the increasing level of vaccination amongst our community. And I'm hopeful that we are starting to see some blossoming of the next stages and some more certainty in our lives. And I hope to give you some certainty this evening about next steps for our school. Now, back in September, I used this analogy with the staff and with the children that we were relaunching our rocket being our school, following the first period of lockdown and school closure last academic year. But of course, our rocket was grounded a little after Christmas and on the 4th of January. And so what we're having to do at this stage is to refuel that rocket and prepare for liftoff again, but with a version 2 this time around. But back in September, this was very much our mission statement, and it remains so true today, that we must safely secure our community so that all of its members can thrive and achieve more than they ever thought possible. And that remains as true today as it did back in September. That if we have safety first, then we are able to fly as a community. We know that if children and young people feel safe, if they love what they're doing, then they will be able to achieve and do so very well. So as we prepare for this next phase, I feel what's important is to hold on to what's in our control, and much is in our control, in our gift during this stage, and more so perhaps than it has been in recent months. But I'm very aware that there is considerable fear and anxiety because the pandemic is still very much alive and around us. But we must try as far as possible to put as much strength behind what we're doing. And I hope that the level of control that we've put in place at school will enable you to see that strength about the next stage and to reduce fear as far as possible. So in terms of the objectives for our meeting this evening, I hope that this will be time for you to feel informed about the next steps, time for you to feel confident and I hope reassured, and time, most importantly, for you to ask questions. And what's key for you to know in terms of what we will go through this evening, what lateral flow testing is and how it works, the timetable for reopening, which is very much organised around the requirements for lateral flow testing, the measures that we've put in place to keep staff and students safe, how we will reduce contact between people because that remains the most significant mitigating factor in terms of reducing risk, how the curriculum and assessment will evolve to best support your child. But what is, of course, perhaps a symptom of this time is that, in fact, I will only touch on that item this evening. The majority of this presentation will be about the safe return to school and lateral flow testing. I very much look forward to the coming weeks where hopefully, as a head teacher, I can begin to focus ever more on curriculum and assessment and learning and broader opportunities over some of these other aspects. But for all of this to work, there are some very key things that we will all need to do as individuals, as parents and students and staff, because we all play a very key role as individuals to make it work. If one of us chooses not to follow some of the expectations, then that has an impact on the health and safety of everybody else. So what's most important as we enter this stage? Well, first and foremost, it's that staff, parents and our children feel confident and safe, that we have a robust and effective lateral flow testing programme to minimise the virus transmission, that we have a staggered return to lessons to support student and staff wellbeing that is not overwhelming in terms of what we do, that we have identified session for core groups of students to receive focused return to school, and if your child is involved in that, you will have already been contacted individually, but some children require more support than others and we wanted to be able to build that in. That we have time and space for students and staff to have quality time together, time to enjoy their relationships and to rebuild those relationships in the physical world and to have some fun within safety requirements, of course, but that is so needed. That we have a full taught timetable in operation swiftly to protect curriculum time, clear communication so that everybody knows what they need to do, and that the Archer way is mirrored in all that we do and all that we expect. That is the case for all that we approach in school, and it's ever more important at this time. So I will break this presentation down into different parts. The first part of the presentation will focus on lateral flow testing, and I'm going to cover these 6 questions that I hope will then enable you to feel confident and comfortable about what happens next. Within all of this, parents, there are some challenges and complexities. From the perspective of challenge, the logistical requirements are quite significant. We've put a very detailed plan together, but we've had to be very detailed to ensure we can make it work and keep everybody safe. But there are also complexities involved. We know that these tests are not 100% reliable. We know that some children and families have concerns about taking them at school, and we have to factor all of those things into this programme. But ultimately, we do believe as a school that lateral flow testing provides a safeguard to our school being able to reopen safely and to reduce the transmission of the virus and to reduce our need to self-isolate children and staff. And that was something we found so difficult over the autumn term. It was quite upsetting, and I know that was the case for many of you as well. So what is lateral flow testing? And I know understanding the science of this is incredibly important. So lateral flow tests are also known as rapid diagnostic tests, and they offer a means of quickly testing for the virus. And they typically deliver the results in about 15 to 30 minutes. Now, parents may be familiar with home pregnancy tests, and these tests work in a similar way. However, in this case, we are testing for materials that come from a person's nose or from a person's throat. Of course, with a pregnancy test, you are testing for urine. With a COVID test, you are looking for the antibodies or the viral proteins that are carrying the virus. You are not looking for hormones. So we are looking for materials in a person's nose and throat and testing them for the viral proteins that suggest they are carrying the virus. Now, rather than sending a person's sample to a laboratory, lateral flow testing kits are quite small and portable and can be administered with minimum training. I think I use that word relatively loosely because there has been an 8-hour training programme for each member of staff that's been heavily involved in this programme. So I'm not sure I would completely endorse the use of the word minimal. I've certainly learnt a lot. However, the speed and the convenience of these tests does come at the expense of accuracy, and I highlighted that when I talked about challenges and complexities, meaning that we must take care in how we interpret and communicate the results. You can see a diagram of what the test looks like on the bottom of the slide that you might find helpful. But chiefly, these tests are designed to identify asymptomatic people and reduce the transmission of the virus. So what will it involve for our school? Well, twice weekly testing for members of staff has been ongoing, and that is completed on Friday. We will then transition all staff to home testing from Monday, and from Monday the 8th of March, all staff will complete a lateral flow test at home on a Monday morning and a Friday morning. Mass testing then for students takes place from their return on Monday the 8th of March, with 3 tests spread across a 3 to 5 day period. Then children will transition to home testing from Monday the 15th of March or Friday the 19th of March, depending on their cycle. What's particularly key here is that as a community, we will all commit to home testing on Monday and Friday mornings. That is protective of our community and protective of the virus. The reason that the tests are taken in the morning is to protect the amount of viral proteins and the viral load so we can measure accurately, but also to ensure that we are not bringing asymptomatic people into our community. Now, students' return testing is built around their return to school timetable, ensuring that no student returns to the classroom until the first test is secure. Now, you may be aware that over the Christmas holiday period, there was quite a lot of suggestion that lateral flow testing might be used as a way of leading to people not having to self-isolate, but that has been paused over concerns to do with accuracy. So we will have to continue with our internal track and trace procedures that we had back in the autumn term. Now, if a person tests negative, they can go about their normal duties, responsibilities and lessons. But if a person tests positive, they must self-isolate for 10 days in line with government guidance, and all close contacts will need to be identified, including the household. When a test has been completed in school, it's considered to have happened in a safe and secure environment, and therefore a subsequent PCR test is not required. But once we transition to home testing, because that is a less secure environment, if you test positive on a lateral flow test, you should self-isolate, but you should also seek a PCR test to confirm that result. And then dependent on the outcome, you either continue to self-isolate or you can return to school or work, but you must inform school of that outcome before you return to school or work. So what does it involve for our school? Well, we have staggered mass testing across 6 school days, and we've done that for 3 very deliberate reasons. Firstly, to ensure that students have the space and support to become confident in self-administering the test, because the more confident they are, then the more accurate the results are likely to be, and that's what we want. To ensure time and space for induction back into school. We would never go straight back into curriculum lessons, for example, in a September autumn start, and we don't want to do that now. Children need time and support to focus on their well-being, the rules, routines of school, and ensure that they feel supported. And then to protect curriculum time and minimise the impact on learning so that we can really maximise face-to-face time. Now, this involves a year group by year group timetable to ensure a safe and secure testing environment. And you were sent your timetables for each year group on Friday. I'm aware this is particularly complex for parents who have more than one child in the school in different year groups, but you will need to review those timetables carefully so that you're aware of expectations for your child. All students will be in school by Wednesday, the 10th of March, but there are some late starts for year 8 and year 9 from Thursday the 11th until Monday the 15th to enable safe testing and further reduce virus transmission. So again, please do check those timetables carefully. So why is it being prioritised in schools and perhaps some workplaces? Well, essentially it's to keep them open and to keep them safe to reduce the transmission of the virus. It's a relatively safe, quick and easy thing to administer, and from a central government perspective, reasonably inexpensive. But it does something else subtly at the same time. It continues to promote the ongoing self-awareness of the virus and the preventative steps that we all need to take. Just simply the process of taking the lateral flow test keeps the requirements in our minds about the things we all need to do to keep ourselves and everyone else safe. So how does it work? Lateral flow tests, as I've mentioned, are designed to analyse various bodily fluids, but specifically here it's about the material from the back of someone's nose and the back of someone's throat, chiefly their tonsils and touching those tonsils with the swab. Once you have taken the materials from the back of the nose and the throat, you then put the swab into a tube of liquid. Now, when this is done at school, you don't do that yourself, but when you do it at home, you have to do it yourself. A sample of that liquid is then deposited onto a pad, and that enables you to identify whether the virus is there or not. When this is done at school, somebody does that bit for you, but again, when you're at home, you have to do that bit yourself. So the liquid is drawn across that pad, and that identifies whether there are specific proteins present in those materials from the person's nose or throat to indicate that they are asymptomatic. So if the proteins are present, it will show up with a coloured line on the swab, as I said, a little bit like a pregnancy test. So how does it work? Now, you've had a copy of this diagram already, and these diagrams will also be available to the children when they arrive at the testing centre at school. So ultimately, you take your swab and you first of all push it as far as you can against your tonsils. Now, I can't make this pleasant. It isn't a nice thing to do, but ultimately, if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, makes you perhaps have a bit of a gagging reaction, that means that you are doing it right. What a very strange thing to have to say. Equally, when you are pushing the swab into your nostrils, you should push until you feel some resistance. When you feel that resistance, that means that you're doing it right, and it may make you sneeze afterwards. Then you put that swab into the plastic pot, and that then enables us to analyse the results. It's important to do that swabbing thoroughly so that we can get enough of the material to do the test so that we get a valid test. Otherwise, we will have to do it again. So in terms of school, our sports hall has been set up as a testing centre. So all mass testing of students on their return to school will take place on the lower school. We've done this because health and safety is better secured with a one-site model for testing. It also affords some greater consistency of experience for the children, so they know once they've done the first one where they might feel particularly anxious, they know exactly what to expect the next time because it will all be laid out in the same way. So how will it work for each child? So they will arrive at their allocated time slot, and that's by half year group. So again, that's why we need to check our timetables carefully, and they should line up on the playground. And they should either do that in tutor group or lesson order, and they'll be told what to do. But what's absolutely pivotal is that they retain 2 metres social distancing from one another, because that will then minimise the need to self-isolate any other children who have been close to that person should a person test positive. They'll be met by their teachers and they will be registered. They should put on their face covering and they will be directed to the sports hall. Once they get to the sports hall, they will sign in at a reception desk and they'll be issued with an NHS card that has a barcode on it that will then be connected with them as a person. They will then be given a tray with their equipment in. That's the swab and a plastic container. They'll be directed to a testing booth, and I'm going to show you some photographs of this in a minute. There's an instruction sheet that is laminated onto the table and they should read that, and it tells them what to do step by step in line with the diagram I just showed you. They should blow their nose to remove any other substances and sanitise their hands. They should then complete the test using the mirror to help them identify their tonsils and the furthest point in their nostrils. The test is self-administered to help them become more confident in doing it, but they will be supervised by trained members of staff. They should then clean their desk, chair and the mirror using the wipes and sanitise their hands. They should stand up and wait to be called to the assessment booth, and they should then give their tray with their sample in it to the member of staff who is doing the testing. They will then be directed out of the sports hall and onto the AstroTurf, which is where they will be held until the results come through. Now they will have to wait 30 minutes, up to 30 minutes for their results. So please do talk to your child about the fact there is some hanging around here, and that's why it's so important for them to wear warm clothing. Children will be kept on the left-hand side of the AstroTurf, maintaining 2 metre distancing, and they'll be supervised by their teachers. Now, once we have processed the results, if a child gets a positive result, then they will be taken to one side as privately as possible. We don't want to be calling out names, and parents will be contacted. Students will need to return home and self-isolate for 10 days alongside family members, and close contacts will need to be traced. Students will ideally at this point be collected by a parent because they may be feeling quite upset or overwhelmed, and we want to look after them. They can of course walk home independently if you give us their permission, but public transport cannot be used because that could potentially spread the virus. And if it's impossible for them to walk home or be collected, then we will need to put alternative steps in place. We'd rather avoid that, but we will if necessary. Now, of course, we all hope that we will get negative results, and particularly we expect that to be the case in the first few days when everybody has been in lockdown. Students who receive a negative result will go home immediately following their first test, but return to lessons following their second or third in-school test. Following the first test, it's important that they go home directly because their lessons will be delivered remotely or virtually from home, and it's essential that they don't miss that learning time. Following the second and third tests, students will line up and be taken back to their timetabled lessons by their assigned teacher. Now, just a reminder that a confirmation PCR test is not required following an in-school test, okay? And we will upload the results onto the NHS portal following those tests being completed. So to help visualise this, because I'm aware it can feel quite abstract, this is a map of our lower school that will be quite familiar to you, hopefully, but also to the children. Children should arrive through their usual, through the green gate by reception, where they'll be met by staff and directed to the playground, which we're calling the waiting area on that diagram. They'll then be filed down the side of the dining room and into the testing centre, which is, of course, usually the sports hall. They'll complete their testing process, and then they will file out of the sports hall, maintaining social distancing, onto the Astro, where they will be kept on the left-hand side until we've got their results through, and then moved onto the right-hand side once we're able to either dismiss them or take them back to class. So this is what it looks like when the children arrive at the testing centre, our new repurposed sports hall. So you can see there are yellow markers on the floor, and each child stands next to a yellow marker to maintain 2 metre distancing. They approach the reception desk that you can see with the screen in front of it, and there one of the receptionists will register them, give them their barcode card, and then they will take a tray, one of the coloured trays from the pile there, and move over to the next bit, and I'll show you that now. So this is what the testing bay looks like. So if you imagine that by the blue cones on the floor, that's where each child stands as they wait to be called over to a booth. The reception desk is just behind you at this stage. And they then walk forwards into one of those testing booths. And we've quite deliberately set them up with the grey privacy borders to make sure that children feel they have a level of privacy whilst they are completing their tests. And then this is what each sort of station looks like behind the barriers. So they sit down on the chair, and then the paper instructions is stuck and laminated onto the table, and then they go through the steps that we talked about in terms of blowing their nose, sanitising their hands, and then using the swab on their tonsils and on their nostrils. They should then, my apologies, to just reinforce that in front of them you can see that there's a bay there with a screen in front of it, and that's what they walk towards, and a member of staff would be sat behind that screen ready to assess their results. So in terms of our lateral flow testing, so far we have got all of staff have been being regularly tested. All of our risk assessments for lateral flow testing have been approved by the local authority and Public Health England, and full staff training has taken place. We have deployed some new additional members of staff to the programme to make this work, chiefly invigilators and music tutors, people who are known to the school. And we've also done some redeployment of support members of staff for the course of the 6 days that we will be running this programme. We, of course, have asked you as parents for active consent for your child to take part in this programme, and I hope that as far as possible, all families will give their consent, because the more that do, the safer our school can be. We've, of course, already done that with staff, and I'm delighted to share with you that all of our staff are actively taking part in this process, owing to their commitment to their school and to your child. So what might this mean for you? I wonder if some of these things are going through your head. If your child is anxious, a level of anxiety about this process, I think, has to be expected. And it's about remembering that we do all feel better once we've done it for the first time. And that's the same for staff and for me as an individual as well. So it's important to talk to them about it and to go through the leaflets and maybe look at one of the video clips that we've put together. If you do not give consent for your child to be tested, I of course hope that that won't be the case. But if you don't, then your child should return to school on their usual on the school day and not attend for the testing. And we will just need to be extra mindful that, of course, that child has not been tested. I'm quite aware that a number of parents are worried about the transition to home testing, particularly if they have more than one child, and how challenging it may be to manage this process. Please know that we've got a good support booklet ready for you, and that your child should be able to do this really well themselves, because they've done it 3 times in school by the time they have to do it at home. But if you feel worried that your child won't do it, or you're in a difficult position, then please could you talk to us at school, because we will maintain an in-school testing booth throughout the next few weeks, and a child can continue to be tested at school if it feels a bridge too far to try and do it at home. We need to keep that to an absolute minimum, but we have got that provision there if required. If you would prefer to test your child at home from the outset, that is not advised in terms of government guidance, because they want to ensure that the children have been trained in how to do it first so that we get valid results. However, if you feel that the testing in school is the bit that you don't want to give consent to, but you're quite happy for them to be tested, then I will support that. I'd rather not, of course, because it's not in line with government guidance, but I would rather that children were being tested than not tested at all. And of course, for the majority of you as parents, I know that you will be able to manage that process. A number of parents have already reached out to make that request, so please could you let me know at the earliest opportunity if that's something that you want to do. As I said, it's not my preferred route, but I would rather that they were tested than not tested. I think I've covered what happens if your child is positive. If your child is identified as a close contact of another positive person, then I'm afraid they will have to self-isolate and will have to complete their lessons from home for 10 days. If your child has an underlying health condition or another physical challenge, we should already have been in touch with you to put reasonable adjustments in place for this process. If you feel that we haven't, and there's something that's worrying you, or circumstances have changed, please may I ask you to reach out to school tomorrow or Friday at the latest to ensure that we are able to best support every child and family. If your child is currently shielding, then of course your child should not attend for lateral flow testing and does need to remain at home until those shielding dates are lifted. And again, we should be fully aware of that already, and you should have had contact with the school this week. But if you haven't and you're worried about something, again, could you let us know? If a member of your household is shielding, then your child should, in line with new COVID guidance, attend school as normal and should take part in lateral flow testing. But I'm aware that we may need to make some adjustments there. And again, if we haven't spoken to you about that already, I think we have in most cases, could you please reach out to school at the earliest opportunity? So we've completed this testing process in school. And let's have a look at how we do that and then transition to home testing. So for students who are in Year 11, Year 9 and 7X, and it's a bit more complicated for Year 7 because of how we've tried to do a lot of testing in a day, and I'm conscious of that, but they will complete their in-school testing on the 12th of March, and they'll be given their home testing kits to take home on the 12th of March. So please do grab them off them when they get home so they don't get lost. Now, these students should take their first home test on Monday, the 15th of March before school. Now, owing to the way in which we've organised these tests, we've done them quite close together. It's particularly important that those children take their home test on the 15th to ensure that we are continuing to measure their viral loads. So just a point that is particularly important within the cycle. They should then complete their second home test on Friday, the 19th of March, and all of the other children will join in on that day. The test should be uploaded to the NHS portal, and the instructions in the box show you how to do that, and also to a school portal. And again, we will show you how to do that. For students who are in Year 10, Year 8 and 7Y, they will still be tested in school on Monday the 15th, and they will be given their home tests on the 15th, and they should start their first home test from Friday the 19th and their second from Monday the 22nd. So there's just a little bit more of a stagger there, and I'm aware if you've got children in different year groups that can feel a little bit more to organise. But as a school community, we are saying, as I've mentioned already, that everybody, staff and students together, will all take their tests on Monday and Friday mornings for consistency. But just a reminder that it does take up to 30 minutes for the results to come through. It's often a bit quicker, but it does take up to 30 minutes. So there may need to be some family organisation that's needed there to ensure that there's time for getting up, doing our test, having our breakfast and getting to school on time. So a little bit of family logistics there, I'm afraid, particularly if you're a larger family. As I've said, if your child tests positive, they should not come to school and the child and family must self-isolate. But because it is a home test kit, you should then seek a PCR test. If the PCR test is positive, then self-isolation must continue. But if the PCR test is negative, then the child can return to school and the family can stop self-isolating. But I would ask that you inform school first rather than just sending them into school to ensure that we're ready to look after them after what might have been a traumatic couple of days. Now, with the home testing kits, you will get a copy of this booklet in hard copy, and they have all been prepared for you because I'm aware that trying to follow instructions off the screen whilst doing a home test in the bathroom may be complex. But I will also put an electronic copy of this booklet with the newsletter on Friday. So, what's an overview of the timetable for reopening? I'm not going to go through each day individually with all of the timetable plans, but I do need to give you an overview so you can see how it all fits together and how you link that to the copy of the plan that you were sent on Friday. So first testing starts on Monday for Year 11, Year 9 and 7X, and they then go home for online learning. On Tuesday, Year 11 and Year 9 come into school for the whole day, but Year 8, Year 10 and Year 7Y come in just for their test and then go home for online learning. Wednesday will be the first day we have all children back in school, and we're really impressed by how quickly we've managed to do that by having these two very long days on the Monday and Tuesday. Year 11, Year 9 and 7X will need to complete their second test. To support that process and to enable us to have a safe testing routine, Year 9 are asked to arrive at break time on that day, and they will do online learning session 1, but they will not have a lesson session 2 to enable them to commute to school. You can then see how the process evolves over the course of Thursday, Friday and Monday. And it's quite structured, and we've mirrored every day the same to try and make it as easy as possible. A reminder that when children are not in school physically, apart from the session 2s for the late start for Year 9 and 8, all lessons are delivered virtually or remotely to ensure that the curriculum remains on track. Whilst we wish all lessons to be done virtually, please note that some staff will be involved in testing at different times, and that will lead to a need for some remote lessons. And it's important that that work is completed to the same standard as usual. Now, alongside lateral flow testing, of course, we do need to review all of our wider risk assessment strategies to keep our schools safe. So the second part of this presentation talks about the measures we have in place. So we have a new risk assessment that has been updated in line with new guidance, but to make this easy for us, and because that already meets the current government guidance, all of our autumn term routines will remain the same. So the things that are familiar to the children in terms of staggered arrival times, zoned areas, lining up on the playground, all of that remains the same because we know those things work. Now, we shared with you parent and student booklets in September with all of that guidance in them, and they're being updated with small amendments at the moment, although it is broadly the same as September, and I will circulate those with the newsletter on Friday. But there are, of course, some key differences within our risk assessment, but also within the way in which we are managing school. Centrally, that is lateral flow testing. Also, however, the requirement from the government that we wear face masks in the classroom, both teachers and children. We're now being actively encouraged to consider promoting social distancing within year group bubbles. And whilst, of course, there are some limitations to that, particularly when children are in the classroom, we're being asked to think a little bit more about how we support children with maintaining distance outside of the classroom. Whilst this is not a requirement from central government, it is something that we have decided to do based on our evaluations of our practice in the autumn term, and that is that we've put some additional measures in place in PE, ADT and CPA, where we found that maintaining social distancing is a bit harder and that had led to more self-isolation. So we've put some careful steps in place there. Now, if we talk about face coverings, I'm aware that this is quite a big change and I feel quite anxious about it. Whilst I am keen to support any mechanism that may reduce the transmission of the virus, I am concerned that its positivities may be outweighed by negativities, particularly the implications that this may have for quality teaching and learning, for quality communication, and for the comfort of our young people and our staff. Wearing a covering on our face, it is not that comfortable, and we must think about skin and hygiene. But we have decided very clearly to adopt the government's recommendations because we think it's the right thing to do for now, but we're taking a common sense approach here. So guidance will be issued to all students through their assemblies tomorrow afternoon. We will have a series of mask breaks and we'll explain how that works. There will be identified points in the school where masks can be taken off and then put back on again, and that will be really clearly signposted for them. We have taken the decision at school level, along with governors, to review this practice at the end of the first week, and we will be seeking student and staff voice then to make sure that it really is working and it's not overly having negative implications for teaching and learning. Once we've conducted that review, we will then adjust our risk assessments. So we wish to take a common sense approach here, but we wish to endorse this step initially to do everything we can to reduce the transmission of the virus and to follow government guidance. But of course, mask hygiene is going to be essential here to ensure that we are using these masks as a way of reducing transmission and keeping ourselves healthy. So we'll be helping the children with guidance here, but it would be really helpful, parents, to ensure that your child has a set of face masks on them and they're not simply wearing the same one day after day or all throughout the day, because that's not very healthy. It's also encouraged that they have a plastic container or a bag that they keep their face masks in, again, for hygiene. Now, alongside the masks, the most important thing that we do is to maintain social distancing. In fact, above masks or anything else, it is the social distancing that is the best protective factor. So we have reviewed our classroom layouts as far as possible. And there's not much we could do there, but we've done everything we can. We've put some floor markings in place to really clearly identify where the teacher should be based in the classroom. We've given additional guidance and training to our staff on their own 2 metre distancing. And we will maintain assemblies online till Easter in the first instance, rather than bringing the children together in the hall. Now, to support all of this, we've really thought very carefully about how we enable our young people to embrace these changes. And one of the things that I really struggled with in the autumn term is that I felt we became much more instructional than we usually are as a school community. There was a lot of do this, do that. And in fact, we're a bit better than that, I think, as a school community. And so what we want to do is to enable all of our children to take proactive, good decisions for themselves about how to keep themselves and everybody else safe. And we're calling that the Archer Academy Community Pledge, a way of saying this is what we know we need to do, and we're all just going to do it because we know it makes life better and safer for everybody. And children will be first introduced to this in assemblies tomorrow. We hope, of course, that means that all of our children will make good choices for themselves and therefore be able to become a community ambassador, somebody who models the Archer way, keeps themselves safe and keeps everybody else safe. But we are, of course, aware that some children may struggle to follow those rules and may not make the right choice first of all. If they don't make the right choice first of all, then we need to ensure that we're ready to enable them to swiftly change their behaviours to keep themselves and everybody else safe. So there will be sanctions in place as is appropriate. But of course, we will apply real common sense and sense here. Children make mistakes sometimes, children get themselves in a state and it's not intentional. And we would always apply professional common sense there to support children. But if a child is making a deliberate choice to do the wrong thing, then we do need to sanction that and enable them to move forwards with their behaviour. So, as we have all of this logistical challenge, how do we ensure that our core business, the most important thing that we do, is protected? And that's teaching and learning. Well, you will be aware that on the 8th of February, we had a remote learning day to enable departments to work collaboratively together to review the schemes of work and the impact of remote learning on their curriculum. As a result of that, we have updated all of our curriculum and assessment maps, and then we've done some replanning, and that's what subject leaders and departments have been doing today alongside health and safety training. So thank you for your support today of our remote learning, but that's given the time and space to ensure that we're best placed for this return to the classroom. Now, your child should expect regular and ongoing low stakes testing as they settle back into the classroom. We are not going to hit them with a barrage of tests when they arrive back. That's not appropriate, but the focus is on getting them back into school safely and feeling comfortable and confident and bringing their learning together. But they should then later in the term expect formal assessments in line with the curriculum map so that we can have a really good sense of where they are. What's going to be essential is bridging the link between online learning and school learning, so that the children do truly respect the fact that they've been working really hard for the last 8 weeks and they've done a lot of really important work. That's not forgotten, that's part of their curriculum. And they need to ensure that they continue to keep that accessible, that it's organised, because there may be points when staff ask children to bring particular pieces of work into school. Not many, we're not asking them to print everything out, but there will be points when that's important. In terms of homework, homework will begin in line with the timetable from Monday the 8th of March. All homework will be set on Show My Homework, not Microsoft Teams. So we will stick with Show My Homework because that's familiar to children and to you, and we're all used to it, okay? We may in time in the future for the next academic year make a full school change to Microsoft Teams, but at the moment Show My Homework remains the portal for homework. Now, for children in lower school, that homework will be set steadily, i.e. they will be set the amount they should per subject, but we will not be overly ambitious in terms of what we ask them to do, recognising that they need to get back into school routines. However, for children in year 10 and 11, that will start as it should always be to ensure that they have maximum opportunities for their upcoming exams. As a school, we have some really clear priorities for teaching, learning and assessment based on our self-evaluations and the work that departments have done over these 2 days that they've been working together. One is that we recognise that content and knowledge has been taught really well remotely, but skill-based learning has been harder to deliver. We want a real focus on interactive activities as far as they are safe and appropriate with social distancing guidance so that children can benefit from learning collaboratively from one another. Lots of fun and creativity, they need that more than ever, but also careful assessment once children have settled confidently back into school routines. So what happens after the initial return to school? Well, we will continue to review ongoing government guidance because things are likely to change a lot in the coming weeks, particularly if virus levels continue to fall, which of course we all hope. We're very keen to start our lower school enrichment programme and the second day of enrichment for year 10. Year 10 already have it on one day, but not on the second. And we've really missed that as a school. I've no doubt that one of the main reasons you may have chosen our school is because of the breadth of opportunity. So we're keen to get that started after Easter. Additionally, wider school-based experiences. Again, we're a school that usually has lots of guest speakers and workshops and activities. And while schools have been told not to plan any school trips, there's no reason why we can't begin to plan some of those things. We need a careful assessment timeline. We'd really like to schedule some performances for the end of the summer term and events for real reward and celebration in a formal way outside of the virtual world. But parents, I must ask you now to expect some changes to the summer term calendar, particularly in relation to lower school and year 10 exams. Owing to the requirements placed on schools around year 11 GCSE assessment, we are going to need to make some modifications to our calendar to enable us to best assess our year 11s and to meet the requirements for GCSE assessment. So please be aware that some things are subject to change at the moment, particularly in terms of assessment timelines for lower school and year 10 children, and that we will confirm those over the coming week to ensure that you are best supported and children are best supported. But we do need to make some modifications there to protect our year 11 children at this very critical time. So what's really essential? That if your child or any member of your household has symptoms of COVID-19, that they must not come to school and you must inform the school. It's important there to reference that a member of the household as well, and that's where we did have some challenges in the autumn term. Please keep school informed of any changes in your family circumstances, particularly around health and well-being. Do review the timetable very carefully for your child, particularly if you have more than one child and things are different for each of them. I would urge you to complete the consent for lateral flow testing if you haven't already. We really benefit the most from this process if we all do it, and I would hope that we can all do it. Our consent levels are incredibly high right now as a school, but if you haven't done it yet, because rightly you wanted to wait for this presentation, I would urge that you do that in line with the deadline of the end of tomorrow. Please do put a little bit of time into securing uniform, making sure it fits, making sure they've got everything, you know where it is, that we have a full set of stationery so that we don't have to share objects and children are ready to learn. That must include a calculator and a glue stick and the different coloured pens. Please top up the parent pay account. Our dining room will be fully operational from break time on Tuesday and for lunchtime and all the way through. I can only imagine, parents, how sick you are of feeding your children continually throughout the day at home, but you can hand that over to school now. And we've got a lovely new menu that will be shared with the newsletter on Friday, so please do take advantage of the food offering at school. Ensure they've got their lunch card. That may be hiding under the bed somewhere. If you have lost the lunch card, please just let us know. We will sort that out at school. We would encourage children to carry their own hand sanitizer as well as using the school hand sanitizer, and that set of face masks is really important. They need more than one for good hygiene and to feel ready to have their face mask on whenever they need it. I'd encourage a review of exercise books and notes that have been kept at home so that the child is best placed for learning and feels really confident that they've got everything that they need. But more importantly than all of those bits and pieces is that there is so much to look forward to here. We are able to have some sense of normality, and as long as we're super careful and really thorough in terms of our risk assessment and our risk management, and we maximise the opportunities of lateral flow testing, we are able to be back in our beautiful school, and for our beautiful school to be filled with children once again, which has been so missed in recent weeks. So a lot to look forward to, bringing our community spirit back and the wonder of children in classrooms once again. And I'd urge you to hold on to that as we go through a couple of challenging weeks, a little bit of anxiety and nerves to be completely expected, but that all of that will be worth it, and that I hope your child will enjoy being back at school. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Mr. Gillow, and he is going to have a look at the chat function and the different questions that you've asked, and either I shall answer those questions or I shall direct them to a member of my team. So thank you for listening to me so patiently, parents, but I do hope that that's been helpful. Mr. Gillow.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There are quite a number of questions, so I'm going to get started straight away. What support are you proposing for families that need to remain shielded, including whether students from such families need not return to school immediately, at least?
Okay, so if a child needs to shield, then they should remain at home, of course, and we will provide remote learning. So that those lessons will be provided on Microsoft Teams with the work set by the teacher. As far as possible, we will then video stream the live lessons into the home from school. Now that won't be possible for every lesson, but we will try to do that as much as we possibly can to protect the learning opportunities of the child. Where the issues are related to a parent or family member needing to shield, as far as possible, the child should come into school because that is what the government is saying is appropriate as long as the school is COVID secure. However, we are aware that there may need to be some modifications there and reasonable adjustments around the circumstances of the family. And if we have not had those conversations with you yet, and I'm aware there's a couple that are ongoing, then please can you ensure you reach out to school so that we can put provision in place. But as far as possible, we will be encouraging your child to come into school, and we will make modifications where we can to support your family.
Okay, thank you. There's one regarding an article in the Schools Week publication that was dated the 1st of March saying that secondary schools are now being advised not to send lateral flow test kits home. Is that a valid statement?
So all I can act on at this stage is the guidance that I've been given. I had also read that article myself, but it would be logistically incredibly challenging for us to continue to maintain lateral flow testing at school from the 15th of March onwards. And at this stage, guidance suggests and highlights that as long as a child has been taught how to do these tests and supervised in doing them 3 times, that they should be best placed to be able to do them at home. We want to keep that under review and we will need your input there, but we do need to be able to protect the school day and curriculum time as well, and to help children to get back to some kind of normality. So we will balance that carefully, But as I said, I read that article myself with some interest, but I feel at this stage we're best placed to support our children in becoming very comfortable and confident in self-administering these tests.
Thank you, Lucy. There's quite a few questions that have come in about the N2 surge testing and the emergence of the South African variant. It's all into kind of one about whether our plans will change and will there be any additional support around PCR tests, etc., for our students.
Thank you, Mr. Gillow, and thank you to all parents who forwarded me copies of that leaflet that was distributed to N2 households yesterday. I was slightly surprised not to have been informed of this issue centrally myself before the leaflets were distributed, but early this morning I did receive an email from the local authority, as did all other head teachers in the N2 area, about the South African variant, and I intend to write to all parents tomorrow to offer as much assurance as I can. At this stage, the local authority has been clear that as long as our risk assessments have been approved, which ours has been, that there's no reason for schools not to reopen and that they must continue with their lateral flow testing and to put that in place as quickly as possible. However, I have been urged to actively encourage all families to take part in the testing process to try and identify the any further prevalence of the South African virus. So at this stage, the local authority and Public Health England are guiding me that it is safe for us to open our school in line with the strategies that we have put in place. However, we must keep that under review because I do not wish to put anybody at risk or anybody's safety at risk. But I do think further lateral flow testing becomes more important actually and helpful. But I would urge all families to actively engage in the testing programme that has been put in place by the Health Authority.
Okay, thank you. A couple of more questions around the testing. In terms of students taking their tests in the morning, is there an expectation that they need to do that earlier to get to lessons on time, or would it just be that part of the day will be missed?
No, the children need to do that early because they need to be in school on time. So where I mentioned about that need for perhaps a bit of family reorganisation at home and family meetings, yes, there will be a need to do that test alongside the other morning routines. So that will take some thought. Interestingly, parents who've asked that question, a couple of staff members asked that question in the staff health and safety training earlier today as well. So it's obviously something we all need to think about. But yes, it does need to be done before a child comes to school with enough time to notify us, of course, if they can't come to school. OK, thank you.
If you're a close contact, do you need to self-isolate, including family members?
If you are a close contact of somebody who's been identified as either positive from a lateral flow test or positive from a PCR test, then you have to self-isolate. But a close contact does not have to self-isolate unless that person becomes symptomatic. And you may remember that was the case in the autumn term as well. So only the close contact has to self-isolate unless that person becomes symptomatic themselves.
OK, thank you. A couple of questions around sport and PE and just wondering what the long-term picture is about that. I think a few people are obviously very concerned that PE won't be happening. So what's the plan, I suppose, in general?
So we are desperate to get our PE curriculum up and running, and I think we've all been very aware of how static we have been as adults and our children have been. I can see Miss Alcock smiling away at me. Now we've deliberately tried to organise the lateral flow testing timetable around PE lessons where possible to minimise the impact on that subject area, because of course we have had to use the sports hall and the AstroTurf. But full PE lessons will be operational from Tuesday the 16th of March, and children will be leaping up and down and running around with as much gusto as we can manage. And then our extracurricular sports timetable will kick in subsequently to that, so that we can get back to doing what we know our children need and need best. But could you just bear with us a little bit there? We want to make sure we get the basics right first, and that we've got every security measure in place to protect our young people.
Thank you. The next one is just about ventilation in classrooms. How are we going to ensure that that is followed very carefully by staff?
And that's a really important one. Parents, thank you for raising that. It's been interesting that it's ventilation that has been really highlighted in the government guidance this time around, much more so than last time. So in our health and safety training with staff this afternoon, we attributed quite a portion of time to that. So as far as possible, classroom windows and office windows will be kept open at all times, applying some common sense there, of course, in relation to the temperature. However, A very specific expectation this time is that when a class leaves a classroom or a space, that the windows are all left open to ventilate that space before another class or group of people go into that room. And that message was given very clearly to staff in their training today, and we will of course be monitoring that to enable us to get into that routine. But the significance of ventilation has obviously come more to the fore for public health officials, and I can completely see why. Children of course may be helpful there in reminding their teachers about opening all of those windows as they're dashing off to a different teaching space, but that's been very highly sort of prioritised with staff today.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions around some of the lateral flow tests giving false results, and how can we then obviously get a proper test, and when would we be allowed to be accepted back into school if it was seen to be a negative?
And of course, parents, as I highlighted at the beginning, I'm worried about this. We know that they're not 100% reliable, but if your child receives a positive result, if that has been done in school, that's considered to be a safe test, and therefore they do not need to take a follow-on PCR test. Of course, you may choose to do that, but you don't have to do that. It's not recommended because the lateral flow test should be enough. However, if it's done at home, you must take a PCR follow-up test, main COVID test, because it's not been done in the same environment. To get a full COVID test, they happen at testing areas around the local community, and I shall put the link again in the newsletter this week, and I shall always put it in over coming weeks about where to go and get your test. The positive thing now is that it's very quick and easy to get a test. You can usually get them on the same day, whereas if we think back to sort of September time, it was very, very challenging. So you would want to go for that PCR test at the earliest possible opportunity. You would have to self-isolate until you got the results. If that result came back negatively, then you would need to telephone school, and we would put measures in place to get your child back to school as quickly as possible. However, if it is positive and reinforces the lateral flow test, then your child would need to continue to self-isolate at that point, as would the other household members. Okay, so that's the kind of key difference this time around.
Okay, thank you. Lucy, there's a few parents who are quite rightly just concerned about the level of testing and the fact that students are not in general at risk, and just feeling that it might be a bit too much of it. What are the school going to do to ensure that those students feel comfortable and not overwhelmed by all of this?
I completely agree, parents and Mr. Gello, and I feel on many levels quite uncomfortable about the processes we are about to put in place at school level, because they are medical procedures. However, I have a duty of care to your children, to my staff and to you, to have the safest school possible. And we want to be back at school. I'm sure you know that the best place for your child is school. So therefore, what we've got to do is to create a safe and comfortable environment as much as we possibly can for the testing, so that your child can grow in confidence. I would say that the first test is a little bit strange and does take some getting used to, but you'll be surprised how quickly they then do get used to the subsequent tests. Please know that all of the adults who are with them are all tested regularly, so they're very comfortable with this, and that all of the children will be going through the same thing together, which equally is really beneficial. What's the real sort of golden light here is that because of this regular testing, we can get back into the classroom and they can start enjoying their learning in a physical space with their friends, have social time with their friends, time with their teachers. And I would say that the testing is worth it to make that happen, because it means that they are safe, the school is safe, and they can get on with being where they should be and learning. I can't take away from the fact that the first couple of tests and this process itself is not a nice thing. Even I can jazz most things up, can't jazz lateral flow testing up to be an exciting and fun thing to do. But what I can do is to say, let's do this together, because we want to keep our schools safe and we want children to be where they belong, which is in classrooms, having activities and having fun and learning.
Thank you, Lucy. There's a question about work that's been submitted to MS Teams and students not saving this online, or maybe not having hard copies. Is that an issue? Okay.
I would hope as far as possible, owing to the careful guidance that's been shared at school since January, that children have saved their work. But of course, we know that there's some margin of error here. If anything has been submitted as an assignment on Microsoft Teams, then the teacher will have it. OK, and in most cases, the children have submitted their work as assignments. So don't worry, panic over, the teacher's got it. If they haven't got it, no, it isn't the end of the world. We will build on that and ensure that they have access to any sort of learning where they've missed bits or they're not quite so sure moving forwards. But as I said, most work has been submitted as an assignment, so that is a protective factor. Anything that's been done in a book or notes and that sort of thing, if a child wants to take a photograph of it and submit it to their teachers, then that's encouraged. But no, it's not the end of the world. The most important thing is that we can work out what they do and don't know so that we can help them to progress.
Thank you, Lucy. Can we just clarify, if a child is not going to be tested because they do not have consent from the family, what time do they need to arrive at school on those testing days?
So if you have not chosen to give consent for your child, then they should not come to school on either the Monday or the Tuesday, depending on the first day of testing for their year group. However, they then should come to school in line with the timings for the rest of their year group on the subsequent days. So, for example, if you are a year 11 child, you would work at home on the Monday completely, bearing in mind that lessons would not be set for session 1 and 2 because the teachers are all involved with supporting year 11 in school doing testing. But then they should complete the remote and virtual lessons with the rest of their year group for the rest of the day, but they should come into school on Tuesday morning along with the rest of their peer group to complete their timetable.
OK, thank you. A couple of questions about uniform. Do students need to be in uniform on the days where they're being tested? And specifically, if they've got a day when they have PE, should they arrive in PE kit?
Mm-hmm. So on the testing days, we've taken a deliberate decision as a school that even if they're only coming in for their test, they should wear their school uniform. And the reason for that is it is a statutory school day, and that ensures that they are sort of complying with those expectations. But more broadly, it means that the child's had the opportunity to find their uniform, make sure that it all fits, that they've got everything they need in advance of then having to be in school properly the following day. So there's a kind of a two-pronged approach there. So they should wear their full school uniform. They should come to school in their PE kit if it's a PE kit day as normal, even if we're not doing PE right now, just to help them stick to their usual routines, because I'm aware otherwise it all might just get a bit complicated.
OK, thank you. A couple of general questions about year 11 specifically. A concern about if a child year 11 is self-isolating, how will any GCSE assessments be being carried out? And also alongside that, do we feel that year 11s are up to date with the work that's been planned to be done, or are they behind?
So first of all, of course, we share anxieties about year 11 children having to self-isolate at this tight period of time. And we are currently developing our assessment policy at school in response to the government guidance, to Ofqual guidance, around how assessments can be completed if a child is self-isolating, to look at how we can do that safely without disadvantaging them any further. Now, for parents of year 11 children, you will be invited tomorrow to a special meeting next Wednesday just about year 11 and exams and assessment requirements. So I shall go through that in detail with you at that point to ensure that we're all really comfortable about where we are. But in terms of the curriculum being on track for year 11, yes, we are very comfortable and confident that the curriculum is on track, particularly in relation to knowledge and content. There is a little bit of skill-based work that needs to happen, and particularly in some of the practical subjects, a real focus on the practical work, because of course that has been more difficult to do at home. But we have already scheduled that within the curriculum assessments. And at a meeting with all heads of department this afternoon, we've begun to talk more broadly about how we can set time aside for particular subject areas. For example, a GCSE dance group or a GCSE design and technology group, where they need the opportunity to do some set tasks.
OK, thank you, Lucy. And any further questions like that, I think I'll publish, but we'll keep them for next week. One question about if a parent has had a vaccination and they might be experiencing some of the flu-like symptoms, should a child be kept off school, or can we communicate that in a different way?
And I would ask that we apply common sense there, OK, because that's something we've been experiencing in our school community as well, that as far as possible, if you have had the vaccine one day and you're feeling unwell the next day, I would expect that is because of the vaccine, OK, but I would ask you to apply common sense there. If you feel it would be more prudent to keep your child at home, even if it's just for one day to reduce risk, then you should take that approach. However, in most cases, I would hope that it would be appropriate for your child to attend school.
Thank you. There's a specific PE question, which I didn't know whether Miss Alcott wanted to field, is just about how are we going to ensure those GCSE PE students are able to complete their course?
Yeah, so I don't know if Miss Alcott wants to jump in, but we were in fact only talking about this as heads of department about half an hour ago. But Miss Alcott, if you want to step in, that would be super.
Thank you. Good evening. So with regards to GCSE PE, we will be prioritising students' practical and coursework as soon as we are able to, and all the testing has been completed, back into school. So that will be the element that we haven't done for a while. So coursework and practical will be where we pick up, and then looking at supporting paper 1 and paper 2 revision and kind of mini assessments and all the guidelines that Miss Harrison and Mr. Mustafa will send out regarding year 11 kind of next steps. But yeah, we will ensure that practical is done first.
Thank you, Miss Alcock.
Okay, thank you. There's one question here, is just in terms of following the government guidance last time. Obviously we did have quite a number of or a few pupils and a few teachers who did get COVID. As the school is following government guidelines again, how can you assure us this will be different this time?
And that's a really challenging one, parents. I cannot remove risk altogether. I wish that I could, but I'm afraid that I can't. What I can do is to mitigate risk as much as possible. And will that mean that there will be no positive cases within our school? I cannot guarantee that. What I can do is to take every step prudently possible to reduce risk and to reduce possible transmission. But I cannot say that there is no risk. What I would hope is that as a school community, we take on board every strategy. We did that successfully last time, and yes, we had positive cases, but we were not overwhelmed by them. And I hope that this time around that can be even less, particularly because of the role of lateral flow testing. But it is a complex time. As I said, I can't reduce it altogether. I can minimise it as much as I possibly can.
Thank you. And Lucy, there are a number of other questions that have come through about how can we ensure safety if not all students are becoming to be tested. And I think you've already referenced that we're doing our best with that. Is there an option for parents or children to just continue with remote learning or virtual lessons because they're currently living with extremely vulnerable grandparents or other highly risk categories?
And that links to my point earlier about shielding families, okay, and that is that as far as possible you should send your child into school, and that is the government expectation from Monday the 8th of March that all children are in school. However, if you feel that there are circumstances that we need to take into account, we will want to discuss those with you and make reasonable adjustments where appropriate. However, I would say that as far as possible, you do send your child into school, but that you talk to us about your particular family circumstances so that we can support you as is appropriate. We don't want to put anybody at advanced risk, but we also recognise that children need to be in school. So it's about balancing that. It's about home and school working together to get the best possible outcome.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. There are, again, a group of questions that are coming through regarding masks being worn all day and that not going along the lines of being something that can be opted out of it, and there is a small concern about it being linked to a behaviour code. Just wondered how we were dealing with that in terms of supporting the students as well as the community.
So we will always take the approach of support first. We are a caring and nurturing environment. We want happy and healthy children, and wearing masks is not a complete link with all of our values and vision. However, we recognise that if they reduce transmission of the virus, then it is something we must explore. So as I highlighted, we will have mask breaks where we look at points where children can safely take their masks off, and we will have clear points where they can take them off and when they should then put them back on again. We need our young people to embrace the wearing of masks in the classroom, as they have done so well in communal areas since the autumn term. They're very used to that, but also recognise that there are protective factors in place for them about when they can take them off, when it's safe and when it is appropriate to do so. And please know, that teachers will always apply sensible and professional judgment. If a child isn't wearing a mask, they won't assume it's because they're trying to do the wrong thing. They will always assume it's for the opposite reason. OK, so please know that we will always apply that professional common sense first of all. But we have to be minded that unfortunately children do sometimes make a bad choice, and that bad choice does put everybody else at risk. And we have to be ready to swiftly deal with that to protect the rest of the school community and help that young person learn from their choices.
Thank you, Lucy. What about uniform that's may have grown out of over the last period of time? Is there going to be any flexibility or wriggle room with students who perhaps may need a week or two to get that sorted, and will they be given behaviour codes if not?
So as far as possible, I would ask that full school uniform is worn, owing to the point of the school year that we are at. We've only been out of the classroom for from about 8 weeks, so I would expect that our uniform is broadly there. I'd hope that as far as possible families are able to replace any items that they need, but of course we will apply some common sense there. But what I would urge is that parents reach heads of year in advance of their child returning to school so that we can support them, because we do want to have our high standards in place, our usual routines in place, and make school as normal as possible. Do note that we have a large amount of uniform in school, and therefore it may be swifter and easier to have a piece of clothing from our school stocks. And if you want access to that, it's been quite hard for us to share it in the way that we usually do because of COVID secure requirements, then please do let us know, because we do have an awful lot of very good quality uniform in school that's been donated from parents when children have grown out of things or when children have left the school. So please be aware there's a lot of it in school, and we're very keen to make that available to families in a COVID appropriate way.
Thank you, Lucy. A quick question about, does a child need to have or eat anything before their lateral flow test, or is it better that they don't?
Oh, that's a good question. In fact, I meant to reference that myself. There's no specific expectations around eating or not eating. However, I'm conscious that some children may just be a little bit worried that putting something down their throat might make them feel a bit sick. So I think I'd take that on a case-by-case basis. If you think your child might be a bit vulnerable to that and it might make them feel a bit uncomfortable, they may be better having something afterwards. However, ultimately, they should be able to eat their breakfast at a normal time. But I would encourage you to make sure your child has got a snack on them, because they might find that they didn't maybe eat so much in the morning and therefore need something a bit later in the day. So I take that on a child-by-child basis about how you think your child will feel most comfortable going about taking those tests.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. If a child is put down for the 7:45 test, but they live quite a long way away, could they possibly come in for the second hour to enable them to be in school?
As far as possible, I do need families to support me, please, in meeting the timetable that has been put in place. That timetable is there to try and enable us to test as many children as we can and get back into the classroom. If some flexibility is needed there on the odd, and I'm talking odd here, case-by-case basis, then please may I ask you to reach out to your child's head of year. But I would ask that as far as possible, we maintain the timetable so that we can do this as safely and thoroughly as possible. But I'm aware there are a couple of families that really do have a long way to go owing to having relocated, etc. And we will try our very, very best to support that. We want children in school as well, but we need to do this around a way that is safe and protective, and there's quite a lot of organisation that needs to go on there.
Thank you, Lucy. Just one regarding if a PCR test is required, is that something that a family will need to pay for effectively, or will it be something they'll be able to get free?
So thank you, Mr. Giller. All PCR tests are free. And they are available at a COVID testing centre. And as far as possible, we would urge a family to go to a COVID testing centre. And as I said, I'll publish the link again in the newsletter on Friday about where they are. If that was completely impossible, we have a very small number of COVID tests in school that we can give out, but it takes longer to get the test back. And again, that means that you've got to completely self-administer that within the household. So the preference is to go to a testing centre because it's quicker and easier, but they are completely free.
Thank you. A couple of parents have asked about if a child specifically does not give consent, does that mean they don't have to go through the process? And yeah, how will that look?
So ultimately it is the parent, because the children are under the age of 18. It is you as a parent who is, if your parental responsibility is giving consent for your child based on your understanding of this process. If a child gets themselves into a complete state and won't complete the test and is becoming very anxious and stressed, then we will of course need to take adequate measures to support that child. We're not going to force them to take a COVID lateral flow test, that would be inappropriate, but we would take them to a separate space, give them as much privacy as possible, talk them through the process step by step, provide additional guidance, and then secure next steps by working with you as parents. But ultimately, this is about you as a parent giving consent for something that you recognise is in the best interest interests of the child. But if your child then struggles with that, and I understand some will, this is not a nice thing necessarily, then we will need to put additional safeguards around that. One of the main things we've done is to set up a separate small testing booth outside of the sports hall for some children who may struggle with having to do this in a big room with lots of other people in it.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions that have come through about the summer holidays and when things become, when the term is going to end. So will the term end on the 22nd of July for year 10, this is specifically, but also will summer school, the kind of year 6 to year 7 summer school run as it normally would do?
So term will finish on the published date, and I'm aware parents may be hoping to book some holidays there. We are at this stage intending to run a year 6 to 7 summer school as we usually would in the first week of the school holiday. We are also hoping, in light of the government guidance about additional funding and provision for other summer schools, to make other summer schools available to our young people. We haven't had any detail yet about, aside from the media announcements, about the money and the expectations around those summer schools, but we would like to offer some other summer schools at school if we are able to. And as far as possible, those would be most likely at the start of the school holiday. But as soon as I have confirmation on what I'm able to do, I shall let you know. But of course, we do have to balance all of that around staff availability, their holiday time, and the fact that, of course, GCSE results have been moved forward to the 12th of August. And it does sort of sandwich the school holiday. But we are keen to offer as much summer school provision as is possible. But the year 6 summer school will happen in the first week of the school holidays.
Okay, thank you. We are nearly there. There are a couple more. There's a couple of questions coming in that are quite kind of opinion based, so I'm going to perhaps share them with you later, Lucy. But the next one was more about social spaces and toilets. How are we ensuring that they will be a safe environment and a safe place for students to be using?
So following the routines that we had in place in the autumn, toilets are attributed to each year group. So each year group has a set of toilets for their use, and they're not cross-phase used. And children then have opportunity to use those spaces, and they are in fact a lot more available than perhaps they even were before. We felt we managed toileting really well in the autumn term in terms of provision and accessibility through the zoned areas, and we intend to mirror those routines this time around. What we do need to continue to focus our young people on is the importance of washing their hands once they have been to the bathroom, and leaving that space as clean as possible. But just a reminder that we do have a cleaner in school during the school days now, and have done since September, and that we will continue to have that cleaner in place. They're there now, but they will be from Monday as well, to help us to keep those spaces extra clean.
Thank you. There's a teaching and learning question, really. It's specifically, how are staff going to adapt their teaching and learning to deal with wearing masks in class, especially with not being able to hear students, or students not being able to hear them, and all those challenges that will pose?
It's a really thoughtful question. Thank you, whichever parent has raised that. We're quite worried about it as a staff team. We're very aware of the use of our voices and the use of our facial expressions as teachers. It's a common part of what we do and how we do it well. We're also very minded of children who perhaps have some hearing difficulties or rely on facial expressions, or have perhaps English as an additional language. We've done some initial training today looking at how we can teach using our face masks and using clear face masks and visors in the classroom to protect our access to our face and voice as much as possible. But I think it's fair to say that we are quite nervous about that, and that is why we will be reviewing the use of face masks in the classroom at the end of that first week, because we need to balance whether, from a protective factors perspective, whether it's having a bigger negative effect on the quality of teaching and learning. And we need to look at that carefully to ensure that teachers can do the very best job that they can, and children can learn as best as they can as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we're just about there. I'm just double checking. There's been quite a few similar questions. Last one, I think this might be, if a student receives a false negative or false positive results, are they likely to receive the same result on subsequent tests, or is there no correlation?
To date, there would be no correlation, that they just happen independently of each other, depending on how that test has happened. OK, so if there was a false positive or a false negative, we have to take that into account. And that is why it is so important for the children to do these tests in school, first of all, to help them become confident, to reduce the likelihood of that happening because of how children take them and how confidently they can take the materials from their noses and from their throats. OK, so there's a variable there. I'm not going to hide from that. I'm very conscious of it, but it's a variable that we hope to minimise by the children being supervised in taking the tests at school. So far, we've had really good reliability at school. We've had no void results in the staff over the last few weeks, and so we're hopeful that we've got good processes in place. But as I said, it's not a perfect science.
Thank you. Lucy, a couple of parents have asked whether or not you'll be publishing the percentage of students who are being laterally tested, so they can see how many are being tested.
And I think parents that it is unlikely that I will do that. However, I shall take that under consideration. What I'm able to share with you is that currently our sign-up rates are incredibly high, and in a place that's making me feel very comfortable and confident. If I had huge concerns, then I would be addressing this separately and differently with you as a parent body now, because I feel that I would have a different body of work to do. Whereas in fact, what I feel that I have is that the vast majority of parents have very swiftly given consent. Of course, parents have then needed time to reflect on this. This is a significant issue and a procedure for your child. But I feel at this point that we are very positively placed to run a robust lateral flow testing programme, and that I don't need to adjust my sort of communication measures any further than they are right now. And I'm very pleased for the support there, parents.
OK, and then it's just a bit of clarity, I think, finally, how are staff going to manage lessons with some in class and some at home? Just aware that was a bit of a struggle last year where perhaps some staff were having to self-isolate.
And that was very difficult in the autumn term, and that's one of the reasons why I have embraced lateral flow testing despite its challenges, because I found that very upsetting and distressing, and I think some of you did as well. But we have reviewed our contingency framework around remote learning. Staff have spent some time doing that today as well, so that we're ahead of the game in terms of remote work being available to children. We've ensured that all of our technology is ready in the classroom so that teachers, where it is appropriate, and it's not always appropriate, but where it is appropriate, staff can stream their lessons home. But also we've completed additional training on the importance of staff maintaining 2 metre social distancing. It's very difficult for them to do this, but to maintain 2 metre distancing from the children and also, of course, from one another. We will need to continue to reference that, but I truly hope that the additional training and support and the provision of lateral flow testing and the development of the vaccination will mean that we're as best placed to be as safe as possible, but we will keep that under review really carefully.
OK, thank you, Mrs. Harrison. We have got through those questions. I know lots of people wanted to ask lots of really good questions, so we'll look back through that and maybe look at some FAQs as well. But I'll hand back over to Mrs. Harrison to say good night.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillow, and parents. We will go through all of those questions, building on the ones that were also asked on Monday evening, to ensure that I really am providing you as parents with all of the information that you need. I know that this is a big step. I know that it's a big change from being in lockdown to children returning to school. I know and fully understand those anxieties about safety. I know that I take my responsibilities of a duty of care incredibly seriously. I want to open our school, but I want to do and only will do that if it's safe. And I feel that we're best placed to do that. We must continue to review really carefully, and we must ensure that we're maximising every opportunity that is available to us to keep our children and our staff safe. OK. Now, what I am just going to do very briefly for just a moment before I finish up is I'm just going to hand over to Mr. Latter, my assistant head responsible for SENCO, just to highlight any particular things that may be relevant to SENCO families at this point. Mr. Latter.
Yeah, hello, good evening, everybody. So just a kind of couple of contextual points in relation to kind of our SEN students and particularly our EHCP students. But we have had all of our key workers contacting via the telephone and email with our EHCP students and their families. So we've kind of had good communication throughout this period. And of course, many of our EHCP students have been in school during this period. So for them, this transition or the return to school should be hopefully a bit easier. A couple of things about the actual return to school. So key workers have been contacting families of EHCP students this week and the end of last week to talk about any additional arrangements to make sure they make a really successful return to school. And obviously this evening, and has shown there is some anxiety around lateral flow testing, understandably, and particularly for young people who have complex needs. So, any of families who are here, please just rest assured that there'll be additional SEN staff available during all lateral flow testing, and they'll be there to support the return to physically coming into the building, the return to school, but also with helping them complete their lateral flow tests, and also then returning to lessons in the subsequent days as well. And I think Ms Harrison has already dealt with the issue about if anyone's upset or needs additional time, anything like that, with completing the lateral flow test. We will be there to support our students. That's the absolute priority for us. So yeah, we're there to support, basically. The final thing I wanted to say, which is not related to SEN, but we haven't said, and that is that could all parents speak to their students about any exercise books that they may have at home? I know generally we keep them at school, but sometimes there's the kind of lockdown coincided with some assessments and things like that. So please dig out any exercise books and send students back in with them in the coming days so that we can reunite them with their class teacher. But that's it from me, Ms Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lasser, and particularly if your child is taught by Miss Harrison, that's a particularly important one. Okay, you know who you are, parents, with their child's books at home. Parents, you've afforded me a great deal of time this evening, and I'm really grateful. I do hope that you feel reassured and as confident as you can be about next steps. As I said, I cannot mitigate and avoid all risk, but what I can do is to take every careful step to ensure that our community is safe as possible so that children and staff can learn together and thrive in their environment. And we have done everything that we can to make that happen. What we now know that we need to do is to continue to review that on a day-by-day basis. Please know that lateral flow testing gets easier after the first time you've done it. Expecting some anxiety is completely normal and completely valid. But then I would hope that the children become more comfortable with that over the course of the tests in school. I truly look forward to seeing your child next week and to welcoming them back to school. I hope to see all of you soon. It's a long time since I've seen lots of parents in the flesh, and I really do look forward to those opportunities to spend some quality time together. But it is a privilege to be your child's head teacher, and whilst there are some obstacles along the way, I am thoroughly looking forward to us being able to get back to doing what it is that we know how to do best and doing it safely and securely. Thank you for your time, for your attention, and I look forward to seeing some real children on Monday. Thank you. Good night.